What's up, Kevin?
Hey man, how's it going?
Good, good. Did you get out of your house, away from your computer, and touch grass or snow this weekend?
I did. It's a really weird year in Park City, and it's like, 60 degrees. So you ski in the morning and you hang out in the afternoon. It's not really
It's
supposed to be this way mid-March, but it
no,
is.
no. It's wild. Yeah, I actually took my kids to the Salt Lake City Zoo. Have you been to that one?
Of course.
It's not great. Yeah, it's not great. I don't know. I've lived in other big cities and not a real big fan of that zoo. They are down to only one animal. Like that's it. They have a single dog. It's a shit zoo. It's a shit zoo, Kevin.
Yes, dad jokes. Dad jokes.
I had to get a little analog and actually go see real animals because I was helping my son with a school assignment where he had to write a product spec for a robot that mimicked an animal that might be able to help the environment with some issue. And by product spec, I mean like fill out an 8x11 piece of paper with like 5 questions. And of course, I suggested like an AI powered nanobot that would take control of the brains of someone in our current administration who's actually intent on destroying the environment. I thought that'd be the shortest distance between 2 points, but I backed off because we're in Utah and, I don't want to get him kicked out of sixth grade, which he's probably going to figure out how to do on his own anyways.
So I want to know if the dad joke was written by GPT-5.4. We can jump right in.
I don't think it's that good. it would give you something really bad. You'd make a correction and then it would say, you know what? That's actually such a better joke. I really like your joke better, Kevin.
We're 3.5 years into this, and one of the things that I wish that I had done is to create my own like marker prompt so I could track progress doing the same thing. And I think that dad jokes would have been one of them. Ethan Mollick has his thing where so Ethan Mollick is a professor of entrepreneurship at Wharton. If you haven't followed him, you should totally follow him.
Great
He's
follow.
reasonable and he's smart and he's not into the hype, but he's deep in it. But he runs in images. He runs images, an image of an otter on a plane, like working on a laptop or something like that. And seeing it, how it's evolved over the last 3.5 years is absolutely amazing. At this point, the otter's like flying the plane. And
Right. It started off with like 7 flippers.
exactly. I hesitate to think what a GPT 3.5 dad joke would have been, but at the time, we both would have been like, wow, that's amazing.
This is incredible. I'm taking my phone out at every family dinner to get some of these. This is gold.
And at that point, we should have just like quadrupled down on NVIDIA stock. But
I'm telling you, if you only had that crystal ball. So, I was looking at our notes from the last episode and we kind of started and possibly ended with what had happened with Anthropic and the Pentagon. And I was thinking a lot about this over the weekend and just kind of the potential real AI at work implications of something like this. And I had a few things I want to bounce off you. But for those who don't know, and this is an evolving saga, like a lot of stuff has happened in even the last few days with this. Do you want me to give a little breakdown about what happened, even though we don't get bogged down in the endless political soap operas? But this is just too big to ignore, I think.
By all means. What's your elevator version of,
elevator version
of the situation?
Basically, there was an ultimatum rolled out by the Pentagon to Anthropic Labs. And they basically told Anthropic they wanted completely unrestricted, unfettered use of Claude for military purposes. And Anthropic pointed out that they have this red line, this kind of core safety principle that says that there's 2 things that we will not allow. One is the fully autonomous lethal weapons, like literally killer robots, Terminators, without a human in the loop, and mass domestic surveillance. And so because Anthropic wouldn't drop those guardrails, the government then hit them with a supply chain risk designation. And that label historically is saved for foreign adversaries like Huawei. It's never, ever, as far as I know, been actually designated to any U.S. private company ever. And so the administration then ordered all federal agencies to stop using Anthropic's tech. And this first came out as a tweet from Trump on Truth Social, I think, right? So everyone's like, is this happening? I don't know. Lockheed Martin said, well, I guess it is. Like, I believe social media, and they stopped using it, or they said they did. And then there's a lawsuit. So just on Monday, and we're recording this on Tuesday, so just yesterday, Anthropic officially sued the government, calling this an unlawful campaign of retaliation and a violation of their First Amendment rights. And what's interesting is a bunch of the rival AI researchers, including like Google's top AI guy, Jeff Dean, are actually backing Anthropic on this. And they're warning that this is going to completely stifle US innovation, like these kinds of like unwarranted supply chain designations, right? So that's what happened. And the first thing that came to mind, like if you are in the middle of or have been deploying AI in your workplace or even you personally, vendor volatility is real, right? So like imagine you're a mid-sized contractor doing any work remotely connected to the Department of Defense, and you spent the last year building your whole internal workflows, your agents, your document processing all around Claude because it's the best model out there, right? Or else it wouldn't be so interested in it. And then overnight, the government says you got to rip it out and prove that you're not using it. So, what's the lesson there? You can't afford to be single threaded on any one AI model. And we talk about this all the time. What are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
I mean, first, it's sort of funny. So my background to some degree is in supply chain and like managing global supply chains and like way back. But you always want dual source of supply. And because somebody's factory can catch on fire or whatever it is. And in this case, the factory that caught on fire is Anthropic. Yeah. And even at our own scale or in Ascend, all of a sudden we're having to build features into our internal products and our external products that flag outages, because the other thing that happened over the last week is there was a lot of instability in Claude. Frankly, there was a lot of consumer movement. So like millions of people moved from GPT to Claude. They're voting with their dollars. Cool. Yep. Good for them. But that caused Claude to become unstable. So the first thing that we had to build was instability warnings so that we knew when the apps were misbehaving because of that, which is not something that's really been a problem up until now, at least in the last year or so. And then on the other side is the parallel architecture. And this is probably good in terms of resilience, because now everybody's going to need to be building model switching technology into it, but it may be bad in terms of the commodification of the different models, that as the models sort of converge on standard features and standard approaches, and I'm sure we'll talk about GPT 5.4 later, they're all kind of getting more similar over time, and that will allow your prompts to be interoperable with multiple models. But it also means that your switching cost really drops to almost nothing, which will eventually create market pressures, which will lower the cost of tokens. And for you and I and the consumers, that's all probably pretty good. And we'll all end up with better, more robust systems. But they're more complicated to build right now because you're going to have to test them on multiple models and figure that stuff out.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, super, super good points. I also was thinking about just how these terms of service actually have teeth, right? Like this is real and it can be enforced whenever you want. There's a great South Park episode that I was reminded of about the terms of service and the awful things that might happen to you if you just blindly click accept. But when you do click accept, Anthropic's proving that they'll literally risk hundreds of millions of dollars in government contracts to stick to ethical guardrails. And if you're bringing these tools into your enterprise and you don't deeply understand the provider's acceptable policies, because they will enforce them even against the US military, bad things could happen. Like things could go sideways really fast. And I feel like you as the fun killer, Kevin, Mr. Regulatory, probably have bumped up against this somewhere. I know it comes up a lot in healthcare, for example, as far as the acceptable terms of use. And it's one of the powerful things about having these models at your disposal is you can literally just paste it all in there and actually talk to the models about what's allowable. It's putting the kibosh on me a couple of times. We had a discussion where one of my workflows just got stopped because it said, "Oh, that violates the terms of service of a platform that we don't even own, but we're still not going to let you do it." Like, interesting. So that was another thing I was thinking about as well with this.
Oh boy, a lot there. I'm gonna laugh a little bit because the very first custom GPT I ever built was a terms of service analyzer.
I love it.
For that reason, so that I can understand it. And adjacent to that is an SOW, a statement of work analyzer, because the other thing that we bump into a lot are corporate counsels who have put very overly broad language into their basically would make it impossible for me to use any sort of LLM. Like, I have to be able to build things. You hired me to build an LLM solution. Lo and behold, I'm going to have to connect to an LLM to do that. And you're not going to pay for the enterprise version or some custom model. So this stuff is real and it happens all the time. So these are great uses for just super basic AI at work applications of like put the terms of service in there, see how the organization is going to use your data. And if you're a service professional, like a consultant, you better be looking at your contracts and making sure that some counsel hasn't put something in that contract that makes it impossible for you to use your workflow tools.
Totally, totally. The last thing I'll drop in here that will connect what you might be doing at work to the Pentagon is we always talk about shadow IT, right? Shadow AI use. And think about the Pentagon right now. So we are currently involved in a war in Iran that doesn't really seem to have much of an off-ramp in the near future. And the Pentagon doesn't really seem to have a very clear off-ramp to using Claude for that war, right? So they are now designating them a supply chain risk, yet they are the only approved model that is currently active in the Pentagon's different deployments using this tech for some pretty awful things, actually, too. Like some stuff came out in the news that it might have made some pretty horrible mistakes. So, I mean, we talk about shadow AI use all the time, and employees basically secretly sharing tools that leadership doesn't know about. And if your company is mandated to stop using a specific tool for compliance or regulatory reasons, but Joe in accounting is still tunneling into Claude on his personal device to do his spreadsheets, then your entire organization is now carrying massive compliance risk. And so as King Fun Killer, this is something that you talk about pretty often, right? Like this shadow AI use and the implications it can have.
Absolutely. Whoever's listening, whether you know it or not, pretty much everybody in your organization is using AI. And think back to your own reaction when you were forced to pay for it. Oh my gosh, I'm going to pay $20 whole a month for this supercomputer that can do anything, including images of otters on planes. And there's a lot of consumer resistance as far as people actually paying. So people are bringing these free models into your organization. So at a very basic level, everybody listening has people in their organization today who are using free models, hopefully not free Chinese models, to do things in your organization that they probably shouldn't be doing. So there's a base level of risk everywhere. And then it multiplies up as far as being an organization that's dealing with sensitive data of some kind, healthcare data, insurance data, whatever it might be, or contractual information or whatever. There's going to be such a comeuppance in the next few years that I don't even know where to start. Like, I don't think the lawyers even understand where to start. They've got to be gnashing their teeth looking for the right sort of opportunities. You are actually seeing like blanket trolls, like class action trolls that are starting to pop up on social media.
Oh no, really? I haven't seen those.
Oh boy.
Tell me more. I love
This happened to a good friend of mine this week that he runs a really cool like vintage t-shirt company. It's been around for a long time. And somebody is running an ad saying, join a class action against this brand. And it has something to do with a truth in advertising claim or something along those lines. But it doesn't make a ton of sense. And it's shocking because they're buying Facebook ads. And anybody who knows anything about digital media knows that Facebook ads are not particularly cheap. So they're spreading a net to like rope people into this class action against this little brand that just came out of nowhere. Yeah. So that's slightly different, but these liabilities are piling up, and that same general counsel who wrote that crazy policy that was not particularly well thought through is like, yeah, well, I was right because of all of this. Okay, you were right, but the policy isn't in alignment with reality, and the organization isn't in alignment with your policy. So you're going to have to straighten that out. And again, I hate to be fun killer on a Tuesday. Put your own AI policy in your own terms through some prompting and like ask it practical questions about your exposure. Hey, I'm working with this defense contractor. What is this all going to mean for me? And the answer is you probably have 6 months to disgorge it. So there's some nuance in
if the word prison comes in those results, like in the top couple lines, then just try to stop everything. Like that's going to be the
and this goes further than that. I mean, I'm holding up a pair of AirPods in my hands, and I'm wearing a nice set of Ray-Ban like glasses, and we will have recording pretty much everywhere shortly. Like already you're starting to see the Meta Ray-Bans that are out there. You hear about these new Apple devices and the OpenAI devices.
That's so weird that Meta would come out with something that spies
Yeah,
on
go,
everybody all the
go
time.
figure, right?
Crazy.
But what I don't understand, and maybe somebody can comment about this who's actually a lawyer, is you're not allowed to record public conversations in most states. Utah, yeah, it's pretty cool. You're allowed to record pretty much anything.
On your gun, I'm pretty sure. You could just like put it
Just
on your rifle.
tape the shotgun mic to your shotgun.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like California, imagine the circumstance that Eli and I are talking to each other. We're having an animated conversation. He knows that I'm recording. I know that he's recording, but somebody's having like a family feud behind you. And you're recording those people. And in California, that's called wiretapping. And it is going to catch up as
it's getting murky.
It's getting
really
super murky as people are wandering around. Apparently, the Meta attorneys, when they were summoned about some of their recording technologies, they all had the chutzpah to show up in court wearing their recording Meta Ray-Bans.
Yeah.
Like,
they all rolled in with the Ray-Bans. Just
the judge noticed and was not amused.
Yeah, totally. I've had people show up to meetings with those. Full disclosure, did buy a pair. I wanted them for content creating. Once I looked at that footage on a desktop monitor, like, just gonna return these. Like, this looks like crap. It wasn't like out for the mass surveillance, but I have shown up to meetings and people are wearing them, and it's, I mean, geez, is this the future? I think it is, because I feel like tons of people are now working on hardware that's going to be doing exactly that, whether it's a pair of glasses or a little pendant, or where is legal, where is compliance going to catch up to all of the stuff going on?
Well, and the states and the federal government haven't aligned, and the federal government is threatening the states every time they do something that's viewed as blocking laws. So New York just enacted a law about truth in advertising and AI, so AI disclosures and avatars. And so you're advertising in New York, but you're in Utah, so you're subject to the New York law. You have to comply with all of this if you're a business that's
it's like the early days of all the internet law, right? I mean, it was the same thing. You had just like, California's going to have its own privacy act, but if I'm an e-commerce seller and I'm on the internet, then that's the first one I have to comply with if I want to sell anywhere, really, right? So it feels a lot like that, but even more complex.
Well, yeah, and it opens up that trolling argument. So now, not that I want to give the trolls any ideas, but
they have plenty of ideas. Don't worry.
They're ahead of the curve, right?
Yeah,
they're pretty easy just to look at every advertisement that's running in New York and have a bunch of plaintiffs that are flagging all of the AI generated content that hasn't complied and creating some sort of auto filing system against the individual brands. Like,
so wait a second. The complying part, just because I'm not up on this, so I'll just pretend that you are completely up on it and ask you, do you have to disclose in the advertisement that you're using synthetic media? Is that what it is?
Basically, I don't have the granular details. I'm still trying to familiarize myself with it, and including, I'm not quite sure when it goes into effect, and whether it has to be like right across the middle, this is an AI avatar, or whether it's like, this was AI generated at the bottom, or whatever it might be.
I just finished a website, and guess what I didn't use? A single real person or video or anything else. And I'm wondering if that will start to spill out into these marketing websites or marketing landing pages, right? Because another one of these nuisance suits that got really popular over the last couple of years was the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, right? And so the way the story goes is, if I have any sort of disability, and I mean any disability, it could be ADHD, like, your website is just too confusing, or I'm colorblind, like, I need this high contrast option. I mean, really anything, then you are basically out of compliance, right? And so I think it was two different firms in New York City basically just went after the whole country, right? And they collected a pool of plaintiffs. It was like the same half a dozen people. And then they would just send out threat letters, right? Like hundreds of threat letters a day, and say, pay us $10,000 or we're going to sue you, and you're going to lose because you are violating these ADA compliance laws, right? And there's companies that even popped up that would put a little layer over your website. Like, you could hit a little, it looks like the chat widget in the bottom right-hand corner. And then you could then pick, I want higher contrast, or I want this, or I want, to move everything up here. I want pop-ups to be disabled. And they gave you a little control panel. And even with that, they said that there are still things that they could pick out where they could go after, right? So it kind of turns into one of these things where what does compliance look like across the broad scope of all of this murky lawmaking now, right? It's getting really interesting.
Okay, so it gets even worse than that. A couple of different things that happened. Well, first is that the ADA did not keep up with the internet. So it hasn't been revised to accommodate these issues. So there's vagueness. There's actually no legal compliance threshold in the act. It's just a matter of sort of best faith. And even if you did all of the things, it's called what I think UAG, something like that. Even if you did all of the things, they can still sue you. You can say that you did the things and a judge might toss it out, but you're likely to incur legal expenses. They know that, so they go after you to settle for $2,000 to $5,000 or whatever it may be.
Right. The settlement is always way better than the cost of you going to defend yourself, which is what makes it just such a racket.
And then the other part that just really got me is there were all these little companies that spun up that were helping people become compliant. And they would add code to your site to hit all the compliance thresholds. So what the trolls did is they actually identified the code that those tools were using, because if you were using the tool, you had no claim of ignorance. Like, you knew that your site needed to be compliant because you were paying this tool. And then it goes in front of a court and you might lose, because ignorance is not an excuse anyway. Courts can be more lenient about it, but that was a thing for a while. So actually it was worse to be using one of these tools than not to be using the tool. And I wonder what that's going to look like.
Some of the tools would indemnify their subscribers, though. That's how they were selling it. They basically say, we will cover you up to $1 million of whatever if you get sued. So I mean, so now instead of a tool, you're really buying an insurance policy.
I mean, look closer. Just this isn't an e-commerce podcast, but I believe one of those got sued into the ground, and actually got shut down for false advertising.
Why? Because they didn't back up that claim?
Something along those lines. Yeah.
Well, that sucks.
Yeah. Anyway, so all of this stuff is coming at us, and making sure you're doing the best faith to be compliant. Like, this is really going to be a challenge. Yeah. I think you're right as far as referencing, like, adhering to California or New York. Those are the giant markets. California usually leads as far as the regulations. So what is California going to require in terms of disclosures, and making sure that your site or activity is disclosing if it's AI driven, doing all of the things basically.
Yeah. It's going to get a little messy. Wow. We went from the Pentagon to mass surveillance to compliance and
who's fun killer this week? Come on.
Wow. You know what? I'm going to keep the fun train rolling, because even though there's a million things I want to talk about, one of the things I want to talk about, because it plays into a bigger topic, is our buddy Jack Dorsey, who famously founded X, the artist formerly known as Twitter. He slashed 4,000 jobs at Block, which is the holdco for Square and Cash App. And so that equated to roughly 40 to 50% of the entire company in a single day. Just like, whoop, you guys are gone. And he explicitly blamed AI, said that the intelligence tools like Opus 4.6 and Codex 5.3 are just compounding so fast at this point that a much, much smaller team can now do more and do it better. And he said, all the other tech companies, I'm just a first mover. They're all going to be doing this, right? And so it brings up this interesting point of the reality versus what's been known to become AI washing, right? Which is basically pointing to AI as the scapegoat for overhiring during the pandemic, realizing that you have way too much staff, and then being like, yeah, you know what? AI, you guys are gone. You lost your jobs. So, what's your take on that, Kevin?
Well, the funny part is there's also the other side of it, which is just economic washing. So organizations that are totally clearing out people due to AI, but they don't want to end up in the media because they're a moderately sized business. And you lay off, 500 people, 1,000 people, and they call their local news affiliate and they're like, AI killed my job. And then the next thing you know, you're in the news cycle. So just calling it instability, share loss, all the other craziness that's going on in the world right now, not leaning into it, that is happening every single day, all over the place and people aren't paying much attention to it. The AI washing part is that, I'm not an economic analyst. I don't track Block, but my understanding is that they probably did overhire, and this was a good opportunity for them just to clear it out. But
That nice stock price bump after that.
they sure did.
Yeah.
The stock, like, and other companies have to pay attention to that. Like, there's Block versus whoever their competitor company is, and the competitor company analysts are saying, well, you guys are going to need to do the same thing. And this is where that flywheel starts turning a little bit. And the thing is that Block wasn't unprofitable. This is a pretty healthy company.
Yeah.
So it didn't necessarily have to do this, but internally it absolutely recognized that it could, which makes the AI washing part kind of irrelevant to me. Like, they still cut 40% or 50% of their workforce, which means that they've put automations in place that are replacing those people by and large. Whether it's replacing all of them or not, they are achieving a level of efficiency that made them feel comfortable with being able to do that. And we all need to be paying attention.
Yeah, for sure. It is really difficult to tease out what is posturing, though, right? Because it's way easier and better for the stock price for a CEO to say, hey, we're the future, we're an AI native company now, rather than saying, yeah, we hired way too many people during the pandemic and we put way too much faith in Bitcoin that shit the bed, and now we've got to right the ship, right? Very different narratives, going to be very different things to your stock price. Morale, I don't know. I don't know which one's worse for morale. Like, he actually said that he did this all at once because he said it would be better for morale, other than, the remaining 50% of the company to be wondering, am I going to be replaced by AI? The messaging was like, you guys are good. But those other people, though, we got robots now. But all you guys who are left, you're good.
Well, I mean, any change management consultant's going to tell you that's the right move. Death by 1,000 cuts kills morale, causes people to leave. So I would say it's the right decision. If you're going to go deep and make sure it works. I think under the hood, though, something that our audience may not be necessarily catching is that this isn't cuts as a result of Claude Code or chatbots or whatever. I mean, they're all related, but an organization like Block or Shopify or these big companies that are like leading the efficiency charge, these companies are building like real structures that allow them to lever internal agent structures in a way that is not necessarily mere mortal territory. So you can't just announce, hey, everybody's going to be building all of their own stuff now, and we're just going to vibe code ourselves into the future. That's just not the way a larger organization is going to work. It needs to have frameworks around it. It needs to have tools. It needs to have guidance, et cetera. And they've spent the last year or 2 or 3 building all of those things. And now there's enough structure in place that, Joe in accounting isn't going to go reinvent their accounting system, but he's going to have access to bona fide tools that have been built or acquired internally to do his job better, to communicate with sales, to communicate with marketing, et cetera. His job has morphed, but he hasn't necessarily created the technology that has caused his job to morph.
Yeah, but Block, and you mentioned Shopify and other tech companies, they've got big teams of developers, right? So when you look at the things that AI is doing, not just well, but better than most people, it's writing code. It's writing code, right? Mm-hmm. So when you look at firing 4,000 people at Block and blaming it entirely on tools like Cloud 4.6. I mean, do you buy that an enterprise can actually automate 40% of its workforce today? Or do you feel like there is something else going on in that narrative behind the scenes? Because I've been reading a bunch of reports lately, and I feel like there's a big gap. I mean, there is a big gap with the data that we're getting right now between what we can technically do, like what is AI is capable of, versus what's actually happening or what people are implementing, right? So where do you land on that? Do you think that is real? That here's this tech company, and now we can just automate 40% of it. Boom.
I think if it's done right, it is possible. I think the real number for most companies is probably in the 15 to 20% range somewhere, just because of the diversity of activities and things like that. But in dev-heavy organizations, you're doing away with a lot of the feedback loops. You're shortening the development time, like QA is increasingly automated. The people with the right skills are those with the architecture skills as opposed to the coding skills. People in those companies, they're just literally not coding anymore. And if you are a coder, that just doesn't work for you. And it's not going to be a good match for you professionally until you figure that out. So I do think it's possible. I really do. It takes a lot of organization. And frankly, it takes a lot of courage. And I don't want to frame what is going to be socially amazingly destructive as courage. But from a managerial or a stakeholder perspective, it takes a lot of courage to lean into an organization and create the level of disruption that this will create, because the hierarchies are broken, the reporting chains are broken, like your org chart gets broken, and you are going to have to figure out how to rebuild that. But when you're looking at it and you're rebuilding it, you're probably building it without a lot of intermediaries. So one thing that I think both of us have acknowledged is that more senior people in the organization can manage more granular tasks because they're being filtered through agent layers, and they keep that manager level focused on what they most need to be focused on, as opposed to whack-a-mole middle manager type stuff. So it's not a great time to be a middle manager who focuses on those things, because the director who's sitting above you is likely getting the right feeds and able to create the right strategic direction directly to those independent contributors that was formerly your domain.
Yeah, yeah. And, when you say these middle managers, is there a specific industry or group of industries or vertical that comes to mind? Because are you just talking about the larger swath of knowledge work right now?
I mean, we see it a lot in sales, I would say. That the good news for a sales manager is they're probably a pretty good salesperson, and you still need really good salespeople at the pointy end of the spear. But if you have a diverse organization that has like regional sales managers and things like that, at the end of the day, their job is escalation and then combination of different things that work, and then they come together and they all go golfing or whatever once a year, and they share
pass off to an
ideas.
account manager who wines and dines.
Yeah, and if all the information is floating up to master account managers who understand how all the pieces work and are really good at the schmoozing part, like the knowledge sharing piece in particular, and this is an unlock for anybody who's listening, is that you can knowledge share now between different verticals of your organization, such that you're not missing pieces. That, Sally in San Antonio finds some way of solving a sales objection that pretty much axes most deals. And as opposed to her sales manager in Texas, then going to the national sales manager conference every year and maybe mentioning it, it just automatically gets surfaced to Sam in Seattle when he runs into the sales objections.
Right.
It's flattening the communications curve and making sure that people get the information that they need. So that's just a specific type of example. I would say dev management as well, operations management, supply chain. It's basically everywhere.
So taking disparate information, or like we call it in our company, the dark arts, the knowledge that only lives within one individual or small group of individuals' heads, and putting it into a place where it can be accessed by anybody. And a good example, we talk about are all these meeting transcribers, that when you show up to a Zoom call, there's more robots than meetings these days. But where does that go, right? Then where does that transcript go? Does it go into a place that might live in your CRM that isn't part of a larger knowledge graph that your customer success is also plugged into, where you can basically not only pull up all of this information in real time, but see how it's related to other bits of information and people? And that's where the power really comes in. That's where it gets interesting.
And this is totally one of my favorite things. We call it the enterprise context graph, of like the viscera that sits between things in the organization, and how do you pull that forth? And, interesting enough, we may have talked about this previously, but virtual companies actually have an advantage here, because if you're in a giant cube farm, that informal communication happens over the edges of the cubes. As people
too much gets lost around the water cooler.
It literally, it does. It's great for the individual contributors. Just in my own organization, I hate direct messages. I see my Slack monthly report, and 72% of the messages are direct messages. And it means that all of these people in the organization are just talking one-on-one to each other. And yeah, it might be water cooler talk, but water cooler talk turns into project talk. And then nobody else in the team has any idea of what's going on. So that's the virtual version of water cooler leakage, or whatever you want to call it. But with a decentralized company, every piece of communication is digitized. So you have all the transcripts, you have the Slack messages, you have all the emails, and we're doing this ourselves where we're pulling all of those pieces together into an information center that is aside from this shallow like streak of SOP and standard that sits in the middle of the organization. And, out there in internet land, if you're hiring consultants and they're saying, hey, I'm going to take your SOP for sales and I'm going to make an agent out of it. Okay, well, maybe, but only if your SOP is completely perfect and covers every eventuality is that thing going to work. So by building the rest of this corpus, I mean, this is something worth investing in. And it's not like there's a magic wand. It's going to be tough for organizations to figure this out for sure. But this is going to be a thing. And then the next thing is going to go back to what we were talking about earlier about recording. That if you are in a physical environment, I do believe that most organizations are going to get over the privacy concerns and you're basically going to be recording pretty much everything.
Welcome to Facebook, Kevin. Here's your badge and your glasses. Put them on and turn them on.
Zuck can see what you're doing at any time.
I'm sorry. Did you just walk into the conference room without your glasses on? Go back to your desk and get them.
Go get your glasses.
You got to record everything.
And I look at this both two ways. Like we're obviously a very AI enabled organization, and I work with people who are very agile of thought, and they get it. Like this is all about surfacing the right pieces. But boy, if you had an organization that had like low morale and people were unhappy, and then you introduce all this, it certainly feels Big Brother because it is Big Brother.
It is Big Brother.
If it's done right, it's helpful Big Brother, not scary Big Brother. And I know that it's going to be ill used.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably going to take some nasty turns. Like it a little more dystopian before it becomes helpful, but I think the intentions are well-meaning from a business context of just being able to find things when you need them, where you need them, and make sense of stories and tie things together without spending half your day groping around for information, Slack messages and 20 email threads and everything else.
So nothing against the enterprise data readiness business, except it makes me choke a little bit seeing the dollar values that some companies are paying really large organizations to come in and standardize all their data flows. Because if you look at a lot of like AI 101 presentations, it's like your data must be perfect. And the answer is kind of. Your data needs to be good and it needs to be like, it needs to have locations. But increasingly, the LLMs themselves are getting better at making sense out of, like, I'll call them little data puddles or data ponds instead of data lakes.
Messy collections.
But we know that this pile of stuff is all of our customer service communications. And these are all of our client meetings. And this is some of our ERP data. And, obviously there has to be standard connections. But, if you're looking at a multi-million-dollar bill to go through and try and standardize all this into some monster data that's going to be, AWS is going to be licking its chops at your storage bill, you might want to think twice about how much of that is actually necessary to accomplish the sort of Pareto, the 80-20 of the information you want to pull out of the rest of your organization.
What's good enough to show impact right now, right? Like where can you see ROI? And what I really like about this concept too is whose job that is? Nobody's usually. It's usually nobody's job. Nobody has that role, right? Nobody is chief of, let me go email 20 people to find all the shit that you're looking for because it doesn't live in any single one place, right? That's nobody's job. So it's just makes life better. I have never enjoyed that hunt. I can't imagine you've ever enjoyed that hunt, but we've all experienced it over and over again. But whose jobs are being impacted? Go ahead. You had another thought on this.
Well, the other thought was when we originally spun up this podcast, one of the things that we wanted to do was jobs of the future. And I feel like I have a few of those. Obviously, we've been talking about a lot of jobs that are probably in trouble. And I think that people sense that. And, if you feel like you're one of those people out there in the internet, maybe trust your judgment. But what are the types of things that you need to be leaning into? A fun thing to talk about.
There's a few. You might be able to get a clue if you look at the labor market impacts of AI, a new measure and early evidence that Anthropic put out a few days ago. Did you see this thing, Kevin?
No, I don't think I did.
It's not crazy. We'll put a link to it on the show notes here. But for me, the most interesting part of the smattering of charts and graphs was this radar chart, which is the kind of chart that looks like a big spider web. And so on the outside of this circle, you have all of these different roles and industries, right? So you have like installation and repair, production, transportation, management, business finance, computer and math, architecture and engineering. And then you have all these little plot dots of where they go out, with the theoretical AI coverage being in one color and the observed AI coverage being in another color. And it's really interesting to look at because it again talks about that gap between what can AI actually do today versus what is it really being used for. And I don't think it's any shock that the places where the little red center gets closer out to meet the blue lines is in management, business and finance, computer and math. It has the furthest point out, right? But it's still shocking that even in those categories, you basically have full capability. In other words, the models are already good enough to do those jobs in almost every measurable case. But when you have the actual observed AI coverage, it's just a little like it's just poking, it's just starting to scratch the surface. And so when you're in this space and you're listening to all this news and you're trying to think of new use cases, when you hear the lead developers at these frontier labs say that these models are coding better than I ever could right now, I'm kind of questioning my existence, right? I'm just the human in the loop reviewing code. That's all I'm doing right now. You just assume that that is the case everywhere, that everyone has come to that conclusion, but that simply isn't true. So we always talk about this substantial gap between capability and adoption. And right now, I feel like everybody's playing the guessing game as to when that little red center of the circle is going to start to catch up to the outer blue parts of that circle. But there are things that look generally untouched right now. To name a couple, you have food and serving, grounds maintenance, personal care, sales, interestingly enough, is kind of split because what you mentioned with you kind of have this account manager role where it's very relationship based, it's very human to human, versus what do a lot of SDRs on the front line do who are just trying to qualify leads that are coming in top of funnel, right? Very, very different roles, which kind of explains why it's split. But it's interesting to look at these reports because I feel like in a sense you're looking at this crystal ball, right? This isn't reality today, but it has all these early signs of what's around the corner.
Yeah.
And that's where you tell me, Kevin, that no, everybody's cool. This isn't going to impact anybody.
Oh, I'm not going to tell you that.
You're not going to look into my eyes through your meta glasses and lie to me.
There is this other thing that is going on. We talked a little bit about AI washing and then economic washing on the other side. Is that there are a lot of senior executives out there who are being told to be ready for an economic turn. And by be ready, it means be able to capitalize on whatever the heck you can do. If it was 5 years ago, it just would have been riffs. Since it's not 5 years ago, it will be augmentation and reduction there. So, with the markets going every which way, I don't know if they're like dusting off their plans and they're thinking about what's going to happen. But I do want to talk about those jobs because there are a few of them that have popped up that I think are really interesting. One of our graduate interns is applying for AI product manager roles. And what I find with big companies, so like FANG type companies, and you'd think that would have happened organically internally. Like you've got like a product team and a bunch of devs, and you're going to find the person who's the great intersection of understanding how to like build in the live essentially and escalate them. But they seem to be looking for new people whose job is to integrate the architecture and the UX and the customer experience, internal or external, versus the technologies, and be able to combine those to guide the underlying dev teams. So that's one that's popping up. Another one, and we actually train people for this, is something called, we call it process engineering. It's process engineering has been around for a long time, like Six Sigma type stuff.
It's an oldie but a goodie, yeah.
But AI process engineering is taking the intersection of how to identify the right workflows that can be influenced by AI, and then figure out what the technology is on the other side, even if you're not the person doing that. So it's sort of like a project manager. A project manager knows everything that's going on, but they don't necessarily do the thing. So they're handing it off to they're making sure the right thing gets done. And that lends itself to the last one, which I think is a real opportunity for anybody, any organization out there, and any individual, is the actual like workflow engineers themselves. So engineer being a little bit fast and loose, but these are the people who can intercept whatever that task is in the organization and make it real. So they're the ones who are putting Claude Code to work, and they're redesigning the systems. And why I think this is organizationally really interesting is what we were saying earlier about like disrupting everything. Like, okay, cool. Some organizations we work with, they're totally gung-ho about equipping every single person in the organization with the ability to reinvent their job. And that is completely fantastic. But it also bears a lot of risk, and it bears a lot of organizational change burden that comes along with it. But others that are, they're fine. They're not being impacted by this apocalypse. Like, they're charging ahead. Like, you don't really want everybody reinventing their jobs. And it also creates like data risk issues and access risk issues, right, and all these things. But you do need to deputize some people on your team who are those engineers or those workflow people who are going to help the team identify the right tasks and then execute them. I mean, I know you're laughing inside because you call it a dev department, but that's not the right skill set. So you need these people to sit sort of adjacent to the dev department, such that they have the approvals, they have the data connections, et cetera, but they're closer to the business logic such that they can execute semi-autonomously. And I mean, if you have a team of 20, you need to find somebody on your team who's showing the most aptitude, who sort of becomes this person as part of their job. And if you have a team of 400, you probably need 10 of these people who you need to build up over time and give them some training and experimentation and room to fail and et cetera.
I think one of the most important roles coming up will just be that person who can keep up with what the labs are doing, right? Because I think all of these roles are going to be incredibly fluid depending on the capabilities that are just around the corner from all the different labs. It wasn't that long ago that we talked about how something that somebody might want to hire for is a really good prompt engineer. I haven't heard prompt engineer for a while now. Maybe now it's a really good skills engineer who can develop really good skills, not prompts, right? So I think all of this stuff is really fluid as well. Case in point, somebody without any developing background whatsoever, who happens to be one of the hosts of the show, built a SaaS product over a weekend, right? Oh, wow, look at that. Now Kevin's a vibe coder. That wasn't a thing a couple of years ago. So I think half the battle is keeping up with what's going on, keeping your eye on the ball and how it can benefit your organization. And because, hey, listen, we're all busy actually working and doing our jobs, and it's really easy to miss a lot of what's happening here.
Well, that's why you need to listen to us weekly.
That's the only reason why you need to listen to us. That and really bad dad jokes. And with that, Kevin, I think we're just about out of time. But as always, it was a good time. It was a good time. Never long enough. And we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to send us a question to answer on the show, email me at elijah@spark6.com. That is SPARK, the number 6.com, or Kevin at ascendlabs.ai. To learn more about AI strategy and training for your business, visit Kevin's company, Ascend AI Labs, at ascendlabs.ai. And to learn more about design and development of custom AI solutions, visit my agency at spark6.com. You can also sign up for my free newsletter, AI Framework Friday, by visiting spark6.com/newsletter.